Jax, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion today.
Thanks for having me.
Um, yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you here. So I'll actually hand it over to you and let you introduce yourself how you would like to.
I'm Jax Bayne. I am a disabled, autistic, neurodivergent peer support specialist. I have a certified, well, it has now shifted from certified peer counselor to certified peer support specialist in the state of Washington. So that's a whole thing. And point is, I'm somebody who has lived experience being in crisis and using the various mental health and crisis systems in the USA, and as a result, consult on that and also support people in navigating the systems.
Awesome. Well, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. I'd like to begin with, the real you and what's something about your story that people might not see on the surface.
This was a hard question for me because I feel that I'm very open and live to a certain extent somewhat publicly and share a lot of my personal life publicly because I feel like in peer support work, so much of peer support work is sharing your own story to let others know that you're just like them and you're, still walking the recovery path and everything like that and you're still struggling maybe to a certain degree, but less because of being a little further down the journey. And so I think that when I asked my caregiver this particular question, we talked about how it may be surprising for many to know that I still struggle so much with depression and mental health challenges, in addition to um, just the general physical chronic illnesses that I've been getting under control. Because I post about the chronic illnesses and the journey to how I've been treating them. Because I feel like that's a little bit more encouraging since my mental health seems to sort of just remain the same. So that's what I think a lot of people don't understand is that like every single day I am still struggling extremely with mental health and just trying my best to show up and keep putting one foot in front of the other and getting things done as much as I can.
Yeah, I think that's hard, and I think right now, especially for anyone who is not AMAB or assigned male at birth, I just feel like with the political climate and everything that's going on, it's a difficult time to human if you're
To
not a white
human.
dude.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
difficult time to human.
yeah, and especially so for the more marginalized members of our population who are just right now
Yeah.
being told that they don't have a right to exist, which is unacceptable. So
I
I
feel
understand.
it might even be hard for the AMAB populations who aren't actively harming or oppressing others because it's like I wonder if they're
Yeah.
just like, what do I do now? Like, you know, how do I exist? And this is a very brief aside. I don't normally plug anything or promote anything in this kind of corporate way because I'm not really that sort of person. However, I do relate to the world through media a lot, like many autistic and neurodivergent people. And so I've been watching the show called Alpha Males on Netflix, and it's from Spain. And it's this kind of ironic deconstruction of toxic masculinity through the perspective of like four middle-aged white men from Spain. And so it's been very fascinating to watch in the midst of everything that's happening right now. So it's like, timely.
Interesting. I'll have to check that one out.
Let me know what you think if you do, because it's fun.
I will. Yeah. Um, so how did your lived experience shape the work that you do today, Jax?
Mm. It continues to, I would say, you know. I think that since I was little, or almost since even before I was born, in the womb even, I was in crisis because my mother had various health conditions. And so there were elevated cortisol levels that was causing stress, even when I hadn't even been born yet. So I feel like I have always been in some form of a crisis situation or crisis survival type state, even if maybe I had all of my basic needs and like wasn't in immediate danger. My nervous system was always in this like place of fear and hypervigilance. I just developed that way, probably born with CPTSD, like many autistics. Um, and didn't get diagnosed until much later in life. And so I was just constantly like afraid. I felt like I was growing up in a war zone. And I mean, that could have been a little bit because my parents were literally fighting and screaming at each other in the home when I was little too. So some of that. And when you're really small, that feels like war zone, right? And just so many other things that I couldn't stop thinking about hardships and pain, like well before puberty. That was all I was thinking about was like death and pain and why these things exist.
Mhm.
And so I gravitated toward philosophy and psychology and cultural anthropology and the bigger like the topics or the subjects that were trying to find out the why, right? Not just how. STEM is like cool, that's how things happen, but not so much why, right? But I couldn't really find any why answers. And after doing a lot of soul searching and traveling and exploring and even diving into Eastern spirituality and living in a monastery, that just kind of helped me understand that on every level, it's about community and it's about mutual aid and a healthy form of interdependence in a society. And that's just like what we're lacking in the USA and I think in many other places. And so that's where I started to understand when someone falls into some sort of marginalized minority group. Traditionally, we have had to use and rely on peer support because we have not had access to any other form of support or other supports have not been created specifically for us. So even right before everything started to be imploded on a policy and federal level, even in the state of Washington, it was like the peer network is just starting to get built. And now it's, let's see what'll happen,
Yeah,
especially with how many people are in
yeah,
crisis now.
it's so true. And it's like people just don't have the bandwidth to support each other like they did before because it's like everything's imploding. And we were just talking about this before we started recording. Every day, some other piece of news comes out, and it's like, seriously, is this really happening?
Right? It's just
So
exhausting.
it is. I think it really is. Um, what would you say values or principles guide how you show up in your work or leadership?
Hmm. Well, it's funny because it took me a very long time to figure out what mattered to me independent of what society was telling me should matter to me, right? So I had, for a long time, I was like, okay, do I really care about this or am I just expected to care about this? Do people just say that I'm selfish if I don't care about this? That kind of stuff. So after a lot of weeding through that and kind of checking out the cultural values and different belief systems and different cultures and things like that and like kind of measuring mine to theirs, I started to realize that I don't really value categorization of anything in a binary. So good and bad, right and wrong, just anything that falls into a binary, I feel like we're probably missing something. There's probably additional perspectives here, nuance. And so that's where, I can say easily, well, not so easily, but generally one binary that I do try to uphold is has harm been perpetrated or experienced or not? Because in that situation, that's where like you might need to do repair or conflict resolution or crisis de-escalation or something like that because that's how it can go real fast, especially while everybody is so primed because of stress and everything.
Mhm.
So I guess for me, I really do value harmony or at least the ability to have an environment where someone feels safe enough to start calming down enough in their nervous system that they can kind of have their brain come back online so they can think more
Mhm.
clearly. Because the one thing I've noticed the most, again, even before the world imploded in all these ways, that the neurodivergent people I was supporting had so much stress that it was like the prefrontal cortex, the executive functions were not able to function properly. And so the ability to receive new information was impaired. The ability to literally learn something new gets impaired when you're feeling super scared and stressed because your nervous system's like, something's telling me you're in danger, and it seems like it's more important to get out of danger than to learn new information right now. You know?
Right.
So that's where the somatic skills that I teach people come into play because I'm like, all right, yes, the thing that you are panicking about is absolutely valid, totally real. We're going to deal with it. We're going to like problem solve it, all of that stuff, right? But in order to
Mhm.
do that, we got to calm down first. And I know you might think you're feeling calm, but do you know about dissociation? Let's talk about not being in the body and like getting back in the body because it's very common for autistics and neurodivergents to be somewhat depersonalized and derealized without even knowing it because we've been that way our entire lives to try to cope with all of the stress. So we might be functioning better than some right now just because, again, we've been primed to be dealing with all the stress. And we're also very sensitive. So we also could just be incapacitated right now.
Right. Yeah. It's like a survival mechanism, just being able to kind of disconnect from everything that's going on, disconnect from your body. I actually
Exactly.
just created a workshop on this. It's called Unlooped, getting out of your head and back into your body.
Nice.
Um, and yeah, I think that this is a really common issue for neurodivergent individuals. We spend so much of our time in and out of fight or flight and all of the different facets of fight or flight, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. There's a
Yeah.
few of them. And having a more sensitive nervous system, it's easier for us to get triggered and go into these states, and it's harder for us to come out of them.
Yeah.
So I would say, having those somatic tools is really incredibly important. So I'm really delighted to hear that you're definitely teaching your clients those. I do as well teach my clients those. I think it's so important. Um, so let's kind of talk about the elephant in the room. What are we seeing in the world right now? What do you notice your clients or your community are struggling with most right now?
Lots of panic, like sheer terror and then despair. Just this feeling
Mhm.
of hopelessness. The problem with what, okay, how can I rephrase this? It is always hard to be an activist when we are working every day with those who are being mistreated by their own government and society simply for being disabled.
Mhm.
That's always just painful in itself when you have empathy, I think. But even more so right now, it is this split that I feel between those who are terrified of surviving, how they're literally just going to survive as their services are being cut. And then that's a big one because as a as a peer support worker, I do accept Medicaid and that is important because so many people, myself included, rely on the public health care to survive. So everybody is really scared and then there's others who are kind of like determined or resolved to go out with a bang and then that is its own concern. Because I really understand the sentiment and I understand where people are coming from if they feel that they are not going to survive. And I also want to be I want to be the person who is both a realist and an optimist at the same time. I want to hope for the best and I don't want to be foolishly naive and counsel folks in a way that could be the difference between life and death for them. Just as a as a struggling individual or family that is vulnerable because you are multiply marginalized in various ways, right now, just getting access to the correct service can mean life and death as they're adjusting and cutting everything. I can't even imagine what it's like in other states right now. So I am definitely grateful that I'm in Washington with all its issues. But for me, I again, I'm just really urging everyone to breathe. Remember that keeping calm means making a choice to use somatic and embodiment practices and self-soothing practices because it's not possible to just like say, all right, I'm going to feel a different feeling right now. I'm not going to be scared about the state of things. No, that's not possible. But it is possible to validate the feeling, say, yeah, ooh, I'm pretty terrified about everything right now. And as you do that, find a way to make yourself feel like comforted and soothed. And when you're saying, oh, yeah, that's how it is, you're doing so in a way that's like, oh, yeah, okay, well, at least you're hearing me. At least you know. So then after we have that initial wave of panic and terror and despondency and despair kind of maybe subside a little bit, then maybe we can think a bit more critically and then reach out to a friend or someone in the community and then start quietly and cleverly, strategically building connections and local bonds because there are more people in the community than we think who are neurodivergent and or just allies to minorities.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of answered my next question, which is what do you think they truly need beneath all the noise? And it sounds like community, but I'll send it back to you.
Yes, community, but that's a vague answer, right? So if we
Hmm.
want to be more precise and specific and detailed with how, you know, and this is actually something that I laid out fairly clearly in a presentation I gave last year for the neurodivergent care. I sort of ran out of time, before I got into a lot of the nitty gritty, but I was hoping to get asked back or this year to be able to have more conversations about my ideas of what we could do. I think, starting with a community center or some online hub where we can funnel resources and have individuals specifically going through and updating resources and helping others find resources that are custom tailored and services that are tailored to them. Because what I have noticed when it comes to disability benefits, social services, anything that is geared towards those who have a disability or are neurodivergent in any way, it's like they'll compile a big list and then just send it your way. And then it's information overwhelm. And then you spend
Yeah,
so much time calling, and then half of them aren't even, they're like outdated. They're not even, you
right.
know what I mean? So it's just like, okay, it just feels like a waste of time. It feels disrespectful. It feels like they're telling the disabled person to do many unpaid jobs for free, plus be disabled like it and unsupported. It's a wild thing. So I think that, specifically creating initially services, programs, applications, functions, infrastructure that is about coordinating what already exists. Because in most communities, there's tons of resources. It's just like they're not working to with each other because there's this stupid competitive mindset. But if we're going to
Mhm.
survive, we really got to start doing partnerships and like networks and things like that, where we have a bunch of individuals that we're all trusting or a bunch of community organizations. Doesn't matter what it is specifically, but as long as everybody has some sort of understood, shared value system and kind of protocol operation, because the hardest thing is that if when you have a disagreement of ideology or someone believes or does something that the other person is just like, oh, I can't handle that, that's the where you need mediation, conflict resolution, things like that.
Mhm.
Community is a hard thing. It's not so easy, especially when there have been decades to centuries of psyops deliberately, you know, infiltrating the US system to kill what is any form of community, essentially, unless you're in some sort of subgroup or subculture that intentionally has built community. By and large, the overarching communities are not really healthy communities. So it's really
Hmm.
helping people unlearn a lot of the toxic sociocultural conditioning we've been programmed with since birth, and helping people emotionally understand that if they've identified with their belief system, it's going to be painful when they unlearn it because they're going to have a existential crisis. But they get
Right.
through
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. How do you help your clients navigate that in a way that feels safe and sustainable? I mean, that
Oh, that's
sounds
a
kind
question.
of scary,
It
right?
is, yeah, it is a big, big question. And the truth is, I have walked the path with many a person, and we have walked to the bridge, and they have looked at that bridge, and I've started crossing and been like, "Look, I'm on the bridge. You want to come with me? It's okay." And they just look at it and they're like, "Nope, I'm good." So it is true that you can't really force people in their own time, right? You can only show them how certain things. But the programming, neurologically speaking, right? The wiring, it is so reinforced by environment. That is what I'm seeing. And that is why I keep thinking if we design specific environments that are sensory friendly, that are neuroaffirming and neuroinclusive, that are accessible, that are geared toward supportive interactions that have some form of maybe not like management, but guidance to them, because it feels like we've all forgotten how to human in the US. Kind of. And at least the autistics have like been wondering how to human our whole lives. So we're like, well, we have some ideas on how to do this.
Mhm.
So it's our time to shine, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's great. I feel like so often you hear, anyone who has any kind of deep relationship with another person gets called codependent or something like that. And it's like, in some ways, I feel like our society is so toxically and violently individualistic that it's damaging to all of us. I don't think that humans were meant to live in a way that is so individualistic. I think that we're wired to live in families and in communities. And you're right, we've really been systemically and systematically pushed apart so that, I think we're more easily controlled and
Yeah.
manipulated when we are isolated. And I feel like that's kind of the big secret. And then we're told that, like, communes are bad and any kind of community that's too tight knit is a problem. And it's like,
Yeah.
well,
Why?
kind of makes you wonder. It kind of
Yeah.
makes you wonder,
Yeah.
right?
I've been wondering
So
since I was little.
yeah, yeah, me too. So what about your inner process? What role has your body or your nervous system played in your personal growth?
Goodness, that is such a great question. And it is such a sorely neglected topic. It is such a beautiful question, though, because my nervous system has simultaneously been my best friend and my worst enemy my entire life. And it's been a process of coming to understand that whether I'm looking through rose-tinted glasses or I'm seeing a nightmarish hellscape, a lot of it has to do with my nervous state, not just what's happening out, externally. Like, sure, there's a certain amount that I can't control externally. However, what I realize that ultimately, no matter what situation I'm in, I can always control my perspective or how I'm choosing to look at something, what kinds of beliefs I'm forming as a result. And that is something that actually is really, really hard to do and requires a lot of training. And I did not realize how much training that actually requires because it's like a meta cognition. It's not just being aware of your thoughts, but it's also being able to pause your thought process. So as you're having thoughts going through your mind, you go, "Oh, wait, hold on. That's an interesting thought. Yoink. I'm gonna dance with this thought for a moment. Let's get rid of those other thoughts. Okay, cool. Spotlight." And then you're like, "All right, what does this thought mean? Where is it coming from?" You know, if I believe this thought to be true, then that must mean I believe this to be true too. And if I believe that, then does it mean that I believe that? And at first, this seems like some sort of abstract mental process that could just be speculation or rumination. But where it differs is when you actually are embodied enough and in tune with your entire physical body, not just like your neck up, as we intellectual neurodivergents like to live in our heads here. But when you're actually starting to get back into the whole body, then as you start to peel the layers of your mental process and start to see the mechanisms of your schema and your reality, paradigm and your belief system, you start to see, oh, wait, I've got a gut feeling that's in reaction to that. Oh, my stomach hurts when I think about that. What does that mean? And then I start asking myself more questions and I get way more information than I've ever gotten from therapy. From any form of talk therapy. I was able to psychoanalyze myself without a lot of help, but I was not able to discover how to befriend my nervous system, which means also my brain, my mind, until I discovered somatics with a neurodivergent twist.
Okay, so let's talk about somatics with a neurodivergent twist. What are small but powerful practices that have helped you stay grounded and clear?
Well, I think the one that I always go back to is the one I learned from Damon Sweeney, who created neuromastery, and that's the finger point acupressure points. And it's just between like the knuckle and the fingertip, kind of there's this indent on either side of the finger, and then you switch and kind of do the each finger matches. So it'll be pointer to pointer, middle to middle, like this essentially, and then you switch hands. And with each finger massage, as you like, you can tap, you can stroke, whatever works for you, here. And you can just do it in your lap, right? So it's just like this little stim that no one really pays attention to. You can time breaths. So each finger, you can time a slow breath to it. And then as you switch to each finger, you can also cue yourself to do a body scan. And then you can also add like a mantra, like what was a really white way to say that? Mantra. I was like, shame on me, I know better. But a lot of the mantras I'm thinking of aren't in English. So I was like, well, is it really a mantra? We call them a key phrase in neuromastery, because it
Mhm.
unlocks something that you're feeling, right? If you get it on the so sorry, I'm not super eloquent today. I'm just using
That's
hand
fine.
gestures. Um, but yeah, so the finger points, because you can just time it and you can just stack other practices. Sometimes I'll sway as I do the finger points, I'll hum and dance around, and then if the finger
Mhm.
points aren't enough, I'll do the full body, the bilateral stimulation like EMDR, kind of hugging like from havening, the full head points from EFT. There's so many different ones. And if you stack them, that's what I found is the key for neurodivergence, because we're too hyperactive, we tend to be, right? Or the executive dysfunction component makes it so attention and focus is hard. So when you put multiple levels of attention, you've got like a cognitive linguistic component, a breath component. The attention has to bounce back and forth between multiple things, a kinesthetic or vestibular movement component, right? So you've got all of these different components that can engage different parts of the brain and the body. And then as you do that, you really just set a timer for like 5 minutes. You'd be pretty surprised of, ooh, hey, look, it's going down. The feeling of, whatever the negative was. Or sometimes it changes and it'll change into something else. And then you'll realize, oh, this is actually a deeper issue. And then that's just as helpful, because then you're uncovering some potential deep wound that needs addressing, like a trauma that you didn't know you had. And that is responsible for a lot of your daily feelings and behaviors that you're not even aware of. So either way, um, doing this kind of stacked somatic and then adding, I think, a cognitive, not just somatic component is important, because we often, with the dissociation, it's the mind and body are kind of unlinked. So we're trying to link them back together, and then that can help us get rebalanced, help with the dysautonomia, functional neurological disorder, and all the chronic illnesses that we often develop.
Such a powerful answer and so beautifully said. Yes, absolutely. I think that really combining different modalities can be really helpful. So that's That's awesome. Um, let's talk big picture. What are you most passionate about changing in our industry or in your community?
Big, big picture. But there's the obvious end goal, extreme, decolonization, land back, woo. But then in the interim, I'm like, how to get there, how to create systems that aid in the redistribution of resources, especially when they are being taken away forcibly en masse and hoarded and used to create things nobody but a very small population wants, right? So these are the things that I think about often is I really, really did not realize how much I appreciated the archetype of Robin Hood. That's a hilarious thing that keeps coming to my head lately. And then of course Mr. Robot, the show I've been thinking about a lot, which is another great one. I interface, like I said, so much with media, but I think it's funny because what has happened both nationally and globally has not really deterred my goals and my trajectory because I've been moving in the direction of building these intentional communities that would be supportive and accessible for intersectional minorities who are being marginalized and such, and creating resource hubs and such for these individuals. It's just like now things are expedited. So it's more that I am excited because I think more individuals are finally starting to realize how important the things that I've been talking about for years are. And I'm like, hey, is everybody ready now? Like things are getting to the point, you know? So I'm excited because I am very hopeful that some individuals in positions of power to make some pretty big changes might be coming around to the neuroqueer BIPOC with disability intersection category, which is where I interface with a lot. Because I believe that if you support those who are most vulnerable, most marginalized, and have the highest support needs, naturally everyone else's needs will be attended to as well. And so for me, I am just excited to continue to meet others who are doing respective work to just aid and support one another because I really think that is how we're going to survive, how we always have survived, how we always will survive. But I'm seeing what can I create to make it a little easier for everybody? That's just what I want to bring everyone together in a safer way, in a way that we already have some resources and tools and we're not just like starting over because this is just history repeating itself and we have new tools in a new space. So we just got to find out how to work together under these new conditions.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I won't even go down that rabbit hole, but yes. So if more people truly understood this one thing that you um, would shift for them, what would that change?
Well, to me, I think it's a perspective shift and it's about going to that mindset of possible, or rather cautious optimism, that there is hope, that things can change because there is only change. That's the only constant, really. And so just to know that there are others out there who do care about the same things you care about, are working on them already, and it's a matter of just reaching out and finding each other, connecting, and not giving up because the one thing that the internet has brought me is infinite connection to so many individuals who I would never have met otherwise. And that is one thing that I will always be eternally grateful for, even despite all of the bullying and harassment that I do get and continue to get right now, especially. I wouldn't trade, a moment of the wonderful connections I've made. So to me, we just need to continue doing what we're doing, not losing hope. The one thing I really want to tell everybody is that it is a psychological war. So actually having hope is resistance because they want us to
Yes.
not have hope. And that's part of why I keep emphasizing this optimism. Like, yes, to be practical, to be strategic and everything like that, and to never lose hope because things can always shift.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I absolutely agree with you. Um, a lot of the news media and the messaging that we hear is really intentionally terrifying to keep us low vibration and to keep us controlled. People who are afraid are easily controlled and they're easily manipulated, and they're not motivated to try and change things because they're too busy being afraid. And that is the intention behind a lot of this. So let's close with heart. What would you say to someone watching who feels overwhelmed, but like they have some capability or some capacity to get support or connect or
I try not to quote this particular quote all the time. I'm going to try to paraphrase it, but essentially, it's about bravery and courage and how they're not to be brave is to make a choice. To be courageous is to act in spite or despite being afraid, right? So to me, I feel like I have never known the privilege this lifetime of not being afraid. And if I ever let fear stop me, I probably wouldn't be alive. I probably wouldn't have accomplished anything. And so I have learned that it is possible to complete amazing things while being terrified. And that being afraid doesn't take away, it doesn't detract from the quality of whatever you're doing. In fact, sometimes it actually makes it more special because there is nothing, I think personally, more honorable, more admirable, and more rare in a world that doesn't value honesty and integrity than seeing somebody who is being open about being afraid and still choosing to show up and do it. And that inspires everyone else. If you show up and you are honest and you say, I am so scared right now, like seriously, I'm terrified, and I am still here, that can just spark a room, you know? So I guess it's about just remembering to breathe, remembering the somatic practices, and remembering that we can make a choice no matter what we're feeling.
yeah, absolutely. So where can people find you and stay connected with your work?
Easiest way is probably through my websites, but I'm on almost all platforms. I'm pretty easy to find, Jax Bayne or Gryffin Core. And yeah, I can give you some links and maybe that'll helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that.
Great.
And I'd
Thank
just like to close with a quick invitation to our audience. If you're watching this and you're feeling a pull towards deeper clarity, grounded energy, and a safe and powerful decision-making space, I want to personally invite you to Momentum Reset. It's a 2-week clarity intensive for sensitive, high-performing women. And if you're ready to stop looping and you want to start leading with your full self online and off, this might be the program for you. Right now it's on sale for 40% off. It's $297. It's just a limited time like this. And I will put a link on this showing and also put all of the links for Jax Bayne so you can connect with them. And
you.
thank you so much, Jax, for this interview. It's been such a pleasure as always.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, it's been great talking to you again.
Absolutely.